Ronald Reagan, the embodiment of modern conservatism, ushered in a new era for the Republican Party. His policies and ideas are very similar to what the Republican Party holds today, and he is still held up as the gold standard for potential candidates to aspire to. With his ideas of cutting government spending, taxes, and regulation, Reaganomics became the economic policy of conservatives for decades to come. Even though President Reagan looked to decrease the role of government in the economy, he increased it in people's lives. With the war on drugs, anti-abortion policies, and the police state expanding, conservatives have increased government's role in people's social lives. Reagan also ushered in a foreign policy of interventionism to stop the spread of communism, which has expanded to us by far, having the largest American military presence abroad in our nation's history. Modern conservatives have largely been responsible for the ever-expanding powers of law enforcement agencies and the shrinking of civil rights. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, there are currently 2.4 million Americans in prison, by far the largest in the world. One of the biggest contributing factors to this is the war on drugs, in which the government has spent nearly $2 trillion fighting over what someone can put in their body. In the same vein, modern conservatism has fought for harsh anti-abortion laws dictating what women can do with their body. The Patriot Act was signed into law in 2001, which allows for the indefinite detention of immigrants, the permission given to law enforcement officers to search a home or business without the owner's consent, and to wiretap phones without a warrant. All of these are massive invasions of civil rights and privacy, and a distrust in the American people. American foreign policy has largely been hawkish since the beginning of the Cold War. Driven by conservatives, American wars have been against two main ideas. First, communism, second and most recently, terrorism. These wars have driven the American defense budget to $600 billion, larger than the next 10 countries combined. We have some 300 odd bases in 150 or so countries around the world. The show of American military power might indicate strength to some because of our ability to spend this much money on defense, but could also indicate weakness because terror attacks such as 9/11, the Oklahoma City bombing, and the Boston Marathon bombing indicate that we're still not safe after spending so much. Modern conservatism shows the United States' decline most evidently in its distrust of the people of this nation. Massive prison populations, invasions of privacy, dictating the choices people make in regards to what they can do to their own bodies shows the government's distrust of Americans, and vice versa, with recent cases of police brutality like Michael Brown in Ferguson and the death of Eric Gardner in New York. People are becoming less trustful towards their own government and the ever-expanding police state. Even as approval ratings of Congress, the Supreme Court, and President stay at record lows, conservatives were not scared to shut down the government in an effort to overturn Obamacare, which had already been made into a law. Modern conservatives' distrust of its own people and expansion into the rest of the world has made it hard on the United States to sustain its success. The modern U.S. economy has largely been run under Keynesian economic principles, which call for government intervention through control of money supply and government spending in the economy in times of recession. As we saw with Jimmy Carter instituting wage and price controls in the late 1970s in response to stagflation, and more recently in response to the financial crash in 2008, the bailout of several large corporations in an attempt to keep the economy afloat. These Keynesian economic principles often are somewhat at war with modern-day Reaganomics, which calls for deregulation and decreased government spending in regards to a recession. Keynesian economic principles took over, and the debt has skyrocketed. The United States' economy has not been a stable one since the 1970s. With multiple recessions such as the dot-com boom, the financial crash of 2008, the minor crash and oil crisis in 1973 to 1974, it has been hard for the United States to sustain its success and avoid bumpy roads. In 1980, in an attempt to bring the economy back after stagflation under Carter, Reaganomics was instituted. With marginal tax cutting 5%, a decrease in the inflation rate by 10%, and an unemployment rate under 6% by the time he left office, his Reaganomics was seen as being largely successful. In the mid-80s to the mid-1990s was the most sustained period of financial success the United States has seen in a while. The 1990s saw a massive increase in GDP by 69%, and the stock market tripled. This was unprecedented success and was brought on by the dot-com boom. Government debt rose by 75% during this time, and by the late 1990s to early 2000s, it was evident that a bubble was forming which popped in 2001. Business failures soared during this time as investors began to more carefully look at the companies they invested in. Soon after this bubble burst, another one began to form in the housing market in the early to mid-2000s. By the time 2007 to 2008 came around, the bubble burst, America experienced its worst economic crash since the Great Depression. The government instituted its Keynesian economic principles through TARP and other bailout programs to keep large banks and mortgage companies from going under and push interest rates down to make loans affordable for all. Many people think the U.S. has fared well in terms of the crashes it has sustained and how the United States always seems to come roaring back, and this is true. After every bust since the late 1970s, the U.S. economy has always boomed, until 2008 that was. Although economic indicators such as the stock market and unemployment rate show the U.S. is currently in a good period, other indicators show we're still troubled by what happened in 2008. Most jobs that push the unemployment rate down are minimum wage and other low-paying jobs that don't benefit the economy. The most telling statistic of the United States' decline is the fact that China has recently taken over the United States for the largest economy in the world, according to the International Monetary Fund. For the first time since Ulysses S. Grant was president, the United States is number 2 in economic power in terms of GDP. As a sign of things to come, this could be the most troubling. It's not the first time America has fought an idea, but it is the most recent. Since the attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, the United States has been at war with terror. The United States has invaded Iraq and Afghanistan fighting this idea, and it's hard to tell if the U.S. won or gained anything from it. But if the goal of terrorists was to instill fear in our society, they've been largely successful. From the racial profiling of Muslims to the infringement on the Bill of Rights, the United States looks very different from what it was before 9/11. With 9/11 came increased security measures. Almost overnight, the very small Homeland Security Department became bigger than Hollywood and the music industry combined, with a fiscal year budget of $38.2 billion requested by the president. The Department of Defense budget soared from $400 billion to $750 billion as it fought its battle in Iraq and Afghanistan. Airport lines dragged on as the new TSA was instated at every airport and large public transit centers. The Patriot Act was passed, giving law enforcement unprecedented power in invading the privacy of its citizens, almost always Muslim immigrants. The freedoms that made America great are evaporating because we as a nation fear for our own security. People like to think that the attacks on 9/11 brought us closer together and made us stronger. We wave flags, have memorials, and say cliché phrases like never forget. It did bring us closer together for a few weeks or months, depending on who you talk to, but most importantly, it shows us how far apart we are. The weeks after 9/11, there was no right or left, black or white, Christian, Muslim, atheist, Jewish, rich, poor, what have you. For those weeks, we were all just Americans. Now, is it unrealistic to think that America could be this idealistic all the time? Yes. But should our Congress be shutting down the government? Should police brutality be almost a normal occurrence? Should politicians fight each other over who's more extreme? No, but that's the United States we live in today.